Thank you very much for coming and participating at this event. I'm particularly grateful to Japanese side, to the Embassy of Japan and Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan for enormous support, full support for a partnership and friendship in preparing and organizing for this conference. My gratitude goes to two teams that in the meantime merged into one. I'm referring to the team of Japanese Embassy and ISAC Fund. I am very grateful to their kind work and a lot of work that happened within the last couple of months. I'm very grateful and I would like to greet participants of our panels during the conference. I would particularly like to thank Ambassador Kono and other participants who came from London, from Japan, from Tokyo, but also equally to thank participants of panels coming from Belgrade. Business community in Serbia, European Union and Japan. So Kono to take the floor.
Good morning to you all. First, I wish to extend my thanks to the organizer of today's event and for the invitation to me. It is a great pleasure for me to be here with you today. Before I talk about Japan EU EPA, please allow me to start my remarks by something very personal. It was about 20-something years ago that I visited this beautiful city of Belgrade for the last time. It was a time when the people in the countries in this region were undergoing a very difficult phases after the end of the Cold War. A difficult time it was for sure, but I was very much impressed by the strength and the resilience of the people I met in the city at the time. I also remember fondly people's very positive, even very tender feeling towards Japan that I sensed at different meetings and encounters. It was a time when Japanese embassy was headed by a certain gentleman, a Japanese diplomat called Keisuke Oba, whom some of you in this room might remember. To work even more closely together.
As the Ambassador Kono was telling us about it in my speech, also focuses on that. So we see how important that is for EU. I would start like that, saying that, as it was also said with Ambassador Kono, Japan is a natural partner for the EU. As two of the world's biggest economies, we have long-standing economic relations and we're major trading partners. Other speakers will address this important economic and trade part of our partnership in detail later this morning. But EU-Japan ties are not only economics. We share common values and interests, as it was already said. We are democracies. We believe in rules-based, effective multilateralism to respond to global challenges like climate change and sustainable development. Our international outlook is centered on a strong and concrete multilateral commitment on finding forms of global cooperation for global problems. Agreements that were signed at the 25th EU-Japan Summit.
In this area, we have here people like Taina Dinkic and her team from the Ministry of Trade, Tourism and Telecommunication. Not because I don't have enough information to go into the detail, but because I really know that I can share much more of my experience and my knowledge dealing with the negotiation process, which is actually the process of the reforms in terms of reaching the standards of the European Union in different areas, and particularly in the area of establishing a solid base for the economic exchange and boosting the cooperation with the third countries, with the countries which are outside the European Union. But let me start with one very important, particularly important element with Matea. Matea started, Ambassador Kono actually elaborated much more. The economic partnership and strategic agreement EU-Japan is something which will be also ours once when Serbia becomes a member of the European Union, as you rightfully stated.
Has been at the Department of Economics, University of Belgrade. An assessment of what has been going on.
Give a series of talks to universities and business organizations about the SME, small and medium enterprise promotion policies, which Japan has been quite active in trying to kind of sell. And so I've been to several cities, local cities, in addition to Belgrade, to talk about the SME policy. And this morning I heard about the SME issues from the previous speakers, and so I was very happy to hear these comments. And let me begin by, well, first of all, as the chairperson just gave us some guidance, I'd like to talk about maybe TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP 12, TPP 11, and so on. But before I do that, let me just reiterate some of the important points that I wanted to emphasize in Japan-EU Economic Partnership Agreement.
Road. But today, this is a very specific situation where we have the adoption of this agreement, because for let's say half a century we have let's say a system of trade which is based on General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and now the WTO, the strict rules and everything. And in the last decade we have a problem that some very powerful players, and I would say most important world traders like the US, and one who envisaged this trade system, is now not abiding by these rules, and this was in some sense jeopardizing the system, because, for example, we were discussing regional agreements, and up to, let's say, 2 decades ago, the US was explicitly against any regional trade agreements. They were insisting on the global trade system, WTO rules, and especially when you have in mind that, for example, the General Agreements on Tariff and Trade has successfully liberalized trade in industrial products.
And negotiate with the US and the EU at the same time. The day the negotiation started, the Japanese business lobby was actively pushing for an agreement with the EU. The EU at the time was not interested. Then the Japanese became interested, I think, in TPP, which then made the EU change also course. So there's sort of this dynamic going on, this economic dynamic, which I guess is a geoeconomic dynamic, which of course we have to talk about, but there's also more political and security implications and dynamics. All of them also, I think, already been mentioned. The rise of China and what comes with it. It's perceived not only as an economic competitor, but I think also more and more by some as a security challenge, at least, increasingly also, I think, in the EU, when you follow some of the discussions they have in Brussels. The retreat of US leadership was mentioned, and what comes with it, the crisis of the WTO, but also other multilateral institutions, the retreat from the Paris Agreement, and so on. And maybe one more key aspect, I think, in these systemic shifts is what was not mentioned, I think, is that we're really, I think, ushering into an era of US-China great power competition.
Stupid. I was just ticking the things that I was going to ask that I actually, but I'm sure that our distinguished guest, good last 2 decades, actually ask for some important.
Third one is related to the investment activities, which is very important. And the fourth one is there's a couple of supplementary comments. But sometimes those supplementary comment is that the most important message. Sometimes the British people use this kind of rhetoric, so be careful. Sorry, Mr. Fraser. I'm not telling you specifically. Starting from the first one, which is immediate and indirect effect, is already that in Europe, the value chain or supply chain, interconnectedness among the EU countries, whether it is EU or non-EU members, among the European countries, whether you are the EU member states or non-EU member states, the interconnectedness or the link among those, economic link among those European countries are very, very sort of like interlocked and strong and close to each other. So lots of countries are exporting the final good, but also the intermediate product and the raw materials at each other. So that, for example, taking the Serbia as an example, this country is exporting a lot of raw materials and intermediate goods to the neighbor states like Hungary, Austria, Germany, whatever. The EU-Japan EPA, of course, that it will stimulate mainly the trade flow between EU and Japan. The thing, so that those kind of interconnectedness among the European countries, which mean that, for example, that so in that among those